All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mark Polino with Fastpath. We are here looking at how the heck do you add GP users without being SA or without using SA. We want to apologize. We did this as a live webinar and had a problem with the recording. So we're going to try it again. If it's slightly different if you're on the live recording, that's why. But we do have the questions, so we will tackle those questions that came out of the live recording as well. As I said, I'm Mark Polino. I'm the Director of Client Services at Fastpath and a Microsoft MVP for Business Solutions. So I spend lots and lots of time working with Dynamics GP. And I've got a couple of books out, a lot of them around Dynamics GP, a couple of fiction items there as well. We'll hit that in just a minute. So let's talk about some myths. First myth, Bigfoot. You'll see if we back up one, I actually wrote a fiction book about Bigfoot, so I know a lot about Bigfoot. It's a myth. What about the Loch Ness Monster? Another myth. So in keeping with that, we also have the myth that SA, or sometimes you hear DynSA, is required to add users in GP. It's simply not true. Liar, liar, pants on fire. You don't need to be SA or DynSA to be able to add users in Dynamics GP. Now, there's a couple of things you need to do to make that happen, but SA is absolutely not required. All right, so first of all, this isn't anything new. This goes all the way back to at least Great Plains Dynamics CS Plus 5.0, which is the 1998-1999 timeframe. So for those of you old enough to remember Y2K, this goes back at least that far. It's not a hack. It's not something that was cooked up in somebody's basement. It is well documented in the GP security manual. The manual is titled Dynamics GP Planning for Security, and this technique that we're going to look at is on page 35. So this is truth. It's not a myth. It's not an urban legend, and it's not a story your mommy told you to make you behave. Just to prove that, here's the Microsoft Planning for Security manual. Over on the right-hand side, you'll see there are 5 options in Dynamics GP for adding new users. The top one, option 1, is use SA. Option 2 is the one we will be looking at in terms of a technique. Options 3, 4, and 5 are very similar to option 2. So we're going to focus on option 2. There are some things down the road that option 2 can do that options 3, 4, and 5 cannot. So it is the most flexible and it is the easiest one to apply. Let's take a look at that. Essentially, for this to work, you're going to select a GP user from SQL. You're going to go into SQL Server, select a GP user, and assign them the sysadmin fixed server role. And there's another little requirement that they be a member of Dyn Group, but realistically, they're a member of Dyn Group if they are an active GP user. So usually you don't have to worry about that. And as it states in the documentation, with this option, any GP user can administer GP and add users. So we're going to walk through this with some screenshots, and then we're going to walk through it in real life, and then we're going to talk about some of the other benefits that go with this. So just to give you an idea of what this presentation looks like. So first, you're going to need to go into SQL Server Management Studio. You will need an SA or sysadmin or security admin user for setting up these users, but that's still going on in SQL. That's not something that you necessarily need inside of GP at this point. So you're going to go to SQL Server Management Studio. We'll say that you'll log in as SA, connect to GP. So this is my GP server, MDP CPA. You're going to skip this whole database section. You're going to skip this security under databases, and you're going to go straight to security here. You're going to expand security from the main tree, not the security that's under a database. You're going to expand the logins. You're going to find the user that you're going to use to add more GP users. I'm using Polino right here. You're going to right-click on that user, pick properties, and a property windows is going to open up. From there, you'll pick server roles. Here in the center are the fixed server roles, and you're going to pick sysadmin. So selecting sysadmin tends to freak out some of the IT guys and some of the DBAs. We'll explain why this is not a problem on the GP side. There's a bunch of other controls in place to keep your GP users from tiptoeing through the rest of SQL Server. We'll get that once we kind of walk our way through the implementation. So this doesn't automatically give users rights inside of GP. It means if they already have rights in GP to get to the user window, now they can add a user. If they already have rights to get to the assign a company window, now they can assign a company. If they don't have rights to the user window, checking sysadmin here will not give them additional rights inside of GP. There are some reasons why you don't want to give this to everybody. We'll touch on that as we get toward the end, but these users are still constrained by their GP rights. So assuming that this user, you wanted them to be able to log in GP users, you gave them rights to create GP users, gave them rights to the GP user window, and then suddenly realized they can't create users. Now you go in and fix that in SQL. That user can log in and make these changes and add users. So let's see what that looks like inside of GP here. All right, so I set up my Empolino user, so I'm going to log in as that user. Make sure I remember that password. All right. So then here in administration, we'll give GP just a second to finish because I don't think it's done. And GP doesn't want to behave today. There we go. All right, so we'll pick administration. And we'll go to user. And I want to create a new user. So let's create a new user. And did I not save that? Sorry, I didn't do that. That's not going to work. Let's try that again. Let's walk through the whole thing. So here in SQL Server, I've got, so I did not give Empolino permission yet. So you see all of this stuff is grayed out. I can't do anything with it. I can act like I'm creating a user, but it doesn't actually give me rights to any of these things. So I'm not actually going to be able to create a user. So what I need to do is to pop back into SQL Server here, databases, security here, logins, find Empolino, right click and do properties, server roles, sysadmin, okay. So I think that I need to log back in, but we will check one more time just to make sure. Nope. So you'll notice all of these things have now lit up. I can get at these items. So that saves me a login. I can give them a password. So let's do, Mickey will say, I love Minnie. We'll turn these off so that I don't break my test company down the road, and I'll save that. In addition, I'm going to go to user access here, and we will grab Mickey, give Mickey access to Fabricam, and we'll give Mickey some user security. So let's say that Mickey has access to be a certified accountant, which is impressive for a mouse. And we'll save that off. So Polino did not have rights to do stuff. They were constrained at the SQL level, even though they could get to those windows. So adding that permission gave the user permission to go ahead and add folks in here. Now, just to kind of illustrate this, now that I've created Mickey, let me refresh this. I can go back in and do this same thing to Mickey. So server roles, we'll make Mickey a sysadmin. That's kind of cool. Oops. So Mickey Mouse is now logging in. Remember, Mickey now also has this fixed server role of sysadmin. So Mickey should have all kinds of great rights, but we only gave Mickey access to the certified accountant role. So that means that Mickey is not necessarily going to have access to add users, but we're going to double check and prove that here in just a second once GP decides to come back. Not quite sure why, but there's something about the overhead of recording that seems to slow down returning information here. Oh, Mickey's brand new logging in, so he's got to pick his homepage stuff. No big deal. Now, if I'm Mickey and I go to administration, here I don't have any choices. I can't select user. I can't add people to a company. I can't fiddle with their security because Mickey is still constrained by GP security. All right, so why is this safe? Why does this work? This works because GP actually encrypts and changes the password as it connects to SQL Server. So for Mickey, I typed in I love Minnie as a password. That's not what goes into SQL. GP encrypts that, changes it to something else, and a completely different set of characters gets passed through to SQL Server. So because of that, I can only use this login within the context of GP. I can only log in through GP or through an application that is tied to GP. I can't randomly log into SQL Server Management Studio. The concern with making someone sysadmin is they have system administrator rights, and rights like SQL Server or like SA would have. But unless I can actually get to SQL Server somehow through Management Studio or something else, I can't actually use those rights. And when I go to use those rights in GP, I'm constrained by security. So if security says, yeah, you might have rights in SQL, but inside of GP, you can't go to user, I'm still restricted from being able to use those rights. So this does not override, as we saw, the user's assigned GP security. Just to show you that I can't use this thing in SQL Server Management Studio, let's pull that up and let's connect. And we'll connect here as Mickey. You saw that we could connect to GP. You saw that we're in SQL Server, and we'll do I love Minnie and connect. No luck. Login failed. So I can't get to SQL Server this way. Same thing, I can't get to SQL Server through Power BI or through some other tool. It has to be through something connected to GP that can translate that login for SQL Server, that can unencrypt that login for SQL Server. So realistically, you are constrained for the most part. There are one or two other tools that work with Dynamics GP that can also decrypt that password. But generally speaking, you are constrained to what you are allowed to do inside of Dynamics GP. So the one dangerous part to this, someone asked a question, and why I wouldn't recommend giving this to everyone. The question that they asked was, can this be used to create a company? And so that would be in GP utilities. And so the answer to that is yes. So here in GP utilities, even though there's the access to GP utilities is you either have access or you don't. And having the sysadmin fix server role will give you access. So in this case, if I log in as Mickey and say, I love Minnie, and hit that button, it is going to let me in. It's going to give me the option to do the things that are available in utilities, whether that's create a company or any of the other kinds of things that are available in utilities. So I'm not going to create a company because that'll take a few minutes and we don't want to wait for that. So you really only want to turn that on for administrators because it does give them access to do things like that. But again, you're not now requiring SA to create a company. So there's definitely some benefits there as well. So how is this different from just using SA? So for starters, the user's identified. So if you're using any login tools like Audit Trail from Fastpath, or even just the basic activity logging inside of GP, you can see what user logged in rather than a generic SA. If somebody does something inappropriate, you won't be trying to figure out which of the 8 people that have SA, the SA password were the ones that did it. Were there other people who have the SA password and we just don't know who they are? So being able to identify users is really important. The users also, as we talked about, subject to GP security. Not so with SA. SA generally has access to do whatever they want. The sysadmin rights with this technique only apply when logged in to GP and from within GP. SA rights apply to all of the databases on this server. So if there are other databases on this server, whether that's Management Reporter or something else that you keep on your GP server, assigning the sysadmin fix server role still restricts those users from accessing the other databases. So there's some other things that you can do by assigning the sysadmin fix server role. It allows those users, still constrained by GP security, but some other things in GP that were considered restricted to SA are now available. That includes the ability to delete users, which can be really important if you have folks who leave the organization and you want to remove orphaned users from GP. That would be non-employee users who have left the organization, yet they still exist in GP. That's a hot button issue for auditors. They get concerned that you don't have control of your system when they see things like that. Second, you can assign company access, which we saw. You can, a user with these rights can set up business alerts. Business alerts don't get used a lot because people believe you have to be SA to set them up, and you don't. There are plenty of other ways to be able to set up business alerts. And as I mentioned, there are really 4 additional techniques, although I'm not a big fan of the third one either. But anyway, there are other techniques in addition to this that will let you do that. But certainly this would let you create users. They would be allowed to then set up business alerts. The backup inside of Dynamics GP that can be run from GP. So if you need to run a specific backup or you want to set it up through GP, all of that can be handled. The SQL maintenance functions inside of GP, those will all run. For example, one of the recommended practices with fixed assets is if you're doing fixed assets for the first time and you upload a bunch of stuff and you make a mistake and it doesn't work, it's actually recommended to clear that table and reload. This would allow someone to do that from inside of Dynamics GP without having to go out and get additional SQL Server rights. And then you also get rights to delete GP companies. So, maybe there was an acquisition that didn't happen, or you have way more test companies than you need. This can give that user the ability to delete GP companies. All of this you still control with GP security. But the nice thing is, if you give a user with the fixed sysadmin role the appropriate GP security, then they're able to do those things without being SA. There's a couple of other options here as well. Config.AD from Fastpath manages single sign-on. So your users don't have to manage a separate user ID in GP. It still exists behind the scenes, but your users can log in with their Active Directory login and be able to go directly into GP. This solves a lot of those user management issues with GP. In addition, instead of managing users inside of GP, you can actually segregate that process. Users can be set up in Active Directory, given roles in GP, and be managed separately by a user who might not even be a GP user. So this is great if you're really trying to segregate that and get better control over user setup. So in addition, we talked about orphaned users. Config.AD really helps manage that. When a user gets deleted or removed from Active Directory, Config.AD sees that and goes into GP and deletes or disables a user in GP at your option. And then last but not least, something you really can't do in GP, Config.AD lets you set temporary or emergency access to a role. So let's say that someone is out for a period of time, whether this is a leave or a long vacation or a short vacation, and you need to give someone access to a particular role, but they just need access to that role for a month. Well, with Config.AD, you can give them access to that role, and you can actually set an expiration date, and Config.AD will remove that access when you hit the expiration date. I ran into someone recently who their primary accountants had heart trouble at year end. Nobody else knew how to do 1099s. They were struggling through a lot of things, and really managing emergency access is great for those kinds of scenarios. And then beyond that is Identity Manager for Config.AD. So when you're working with users in GP, the idea behind Identity Manager is this is really around user creation and approval and configuration. So what happens is I could just be an accounting manager and we have a new employee starting. We'd go into Identity Manager and put in some basic information for this user, say that I think this user needs these roles and check them off. And then when I submit that, it goes through a workflow approval process. People can review and approve those roles, the setup of that user. When it's done, the user is just completely set up in the system once that final approval is done. In addition, you can control the timing of this user. So maybe the user is starting in 2 weeks. I want their onboarding process to be really nice and smooth so that the day that they start, they can actually sit down, log in, and actually be working and logged into GP right away. But they don't start for 2 weeks. So I put through my user provisioning via Identity Manager. It takes a week for everybody to do their approvals, but I don't want to have this user in my system who hasn't actually started yet. So I could actually set the date for these users' permissions to start a couple of days from now, or to start a week from now, so that when they arrive, their permissions are already there and they are good to go. We can also set date ranges. So, if you want consultant access to expire after 3 months, that type of thing, it can be really useful for those pieces. So just on the wrap up, Fastpath has a number of other tools that really help with security. Assure helps you understand what's going on in your security inside of Dynamics GP. Can help you answer questions like who has access to create vendors, those types of things. Also, it has a really strong segregation of duties component. So if you want to make sure that that user who can create vendors also can't create checks, this is a great way to do it. It all ties together too. So as I set up a user in Identity Manager, I can actually check for segregation of duties conflicts before this user ever gets set up. Managers have the ability to review that as well. Audit Trail is used to track items in GP. We can track just about any change made inside of Dynamics GP. And we've got great reporting around that to be able to say what change was made, by whom, when, what the old value was, and what the new value was. Audit View kind of wraps this all together with electronic delivery of reporting for reviews, including an option in there to electronic signatures available throughout the products, but then Audit View also adds the ability to do electronic signatures through an Outlook add-in. So you could literally get an audit trail report, for example, in your email, be able to review it, sign off on it in Outlook, and that sign off then goes back into the Fastpath tools and gets stored there for auditors to be able to see that the reviews are being performed. SA is really important for security. Controlling SA is really important to ensure that you have control of your system. Really, you only need SA to be able to do some installs. So typically after the first install, there are some products that require the use of SA to ensure that tables are built correctly. They may work with a sysadmin fixed server role, but if the developer has hard-coded it to use SA, you may need to still log in as SA for that, but really that should be the only place where SA is used in the GP environment. So the biggest problem that we run across really are DBAs and IT folks who don't understand that there is a difference here by assigning the sysadmin role. You're not giving folks access throughout the system. The way that GP handles that login really changes the fundamental nature of what that user is allowed to do. So you're giving much better security and restrictions, and in addition, you are reducing the use of SA. So sometimes that's hard to get across. Sometimes you may have to do exactly what we did here, create a user in GP, have your, maybe in a test system, have a sysadmin, give them that sysadmin rights, give that sysadmin the username and password, and have them try to get in to SQL Server some way other than Dynamics GP. If you need help with that, I'm happy to help fight that fight with your sysadmins or your IT folks. Just hit us up at info@gofastpath.com and ask for me. Again, I'm Mark Polino. We're thrilled that you guys came. We really appreciate you being here, and hope you have a great day.